Welcome to Town and Gown's second virtual lunch at the Forum. I'm Sandy Collier, president of this wonderful organization, and I'm so happy you could join us today. I would like to give a special welcome to those of you who are new to Lunch at the Forum. We are especially glad you could be with us today. We have had 26 successful seasons of Lunch at the Forum, usually in the Bush Conference Center on Chapman's campus. But we weren't going to let the COVID pandemic interfere with our long tradition. So we are happy to bring our 27th season to you in this new virtual format. Town and Gown started in 1968, connecting the community, town, and the professors, gown, and has been active at Chapman University for 53 years. Our membership is made up of alumni, parents, grandparents, current and former faculty, staff, neighbors, and those with a special place in their hearts for Chapman University. Our main goals are to support students through our endowed scholarship fund, to connect with the entire Chapman family, and to learn from outstanding faculty and administrators at Lunch at the Forum. When you have a moment, please visit our website under chapman.edu/TG. You can meet our 3 Town and Gown scholars through a short video. We would love to have you join us as a new member. And now I'd like to introduce you to our first Vice President of Programs, Paula McCants, who will act as moderator for today's presentation. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the program.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining us. Our speaker today is Dr. Anuradha Prakash, Professor and Director of the Graduate Food Science Program in the Schmid College of Science and Technology here at Chapman University. Her presentation is entitled Green Food for a Healthy Planet. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Prakash. She grew up in Mumbai, India, and earned her Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Mumbai. Upon completion, she traveled 10,000 miles away from home to Ohio State University to earn a master's degree in nutrition. By the way, she tells me it was nutrition because her parents did not want her to be a chef. But she realized on the very first day of classes that she had made a mistake, and the study of nutrition was not for her. Fortunately, her advisor referred her to the food science program, where she found her life's passion and earned both her master's and Ph.D. Equipped with those credentials, she has 19 years of research focused on using irradiation to enhance the safety and shelf life of fresh-cut fruits and vegetables and ready-to-eat meals. She has received research funding from the USDA with the ultimate goal of elimination of global trade barriers by reducing the threat posed by invasive pests through irradiation. At Chapman, she teaches food processing and food product development. Outside of Chapman, Dr. Prakash's teaching, she is also a science advisor to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Pacific Southwest Food and Feed Laboratory and is an associate editor for the international peer-reviewed journal Radiation Physics and Chemistry. The Southern California Institute of Food Technologists section recently awarded her a Distinguished Achievement Award for her leadership and accomplishments in the industry. In the community, she serves on the board of directors for the Community Action Partnership of Orange County, an anti-poverty nonprofit organization. As she is forever the student, Dr. Prakash recently returned to the classroom and is currently earning an Executive Master of Business Administration degree at Chapman. Today, at the end of her presentation, Dr. Prakash will answer a few questions. If you would like to pose one to her, you can type a question into the Q&A box on your screen anytime during the presentation. We will get to as many questions as time permits. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Anu Prakash.
Thank you very much, Paula, for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to present to the Town and Gown. It's actually quite an honor, and I'm glad that everyone has joined in. So many people have joined in, especially during this tumultuous election week. I hope I can take you away a little bit away from the politics of what's going on and give you some food for thought. My research is in the area of radiation, but I'm very passionate about sustainability of our food system. And I'd like to share with you today some of our thoughts, some of my thoughts related to this, and kind of show you what's going on in the marketplace. So if I can get this set up, I'd like to share my screen with you. So I titled it Green Food for a Healthy Planet. And right now it feels, maybe I should have titled it Green Food for a Very Brown Planet. And this is what I'd like to talk about. I'd like to start off telling you about how the environment changes and climate changes are affecting our food supply and therefore food security. And in turn, how our diets are affecting environment and climate change. And together, global climate change, food security, our diets also impact our health. Extreme weather conditions, whether they're wildfires, drought, glacial melt, sea level increases, these are all manifestations of climate change, and they affect all dimensions of food security. Changes in temperature and rainfall have already affected the yield of many crops globally. And when we affect the yield of crops or the yield of food, that affects food prices. And when food prices increase, then it makes food access difficult, especially for the most vulnerable people in our societies. And it also affects food utilization, which is the amount of food that we consume and the types of food that we consume in terms of calories and the different nutrients. And this creates a vicious cycle of disease and hunger. But on the flip side, our production of food also contributes to environmental change. And in some ways, if you looked at it, if we did not eat, then maybe we would help our environment. But we do need to eat. So can we do better with how we eat, what we eat, to help the environment? And what I'd like to show you is also our health. And these are the ways in which food production affects the environment. Agriculture is responsible for 50% of the total habitable land use, 80% of deforestation. It uses 70% of the world's fresh water resources, and these are scarce resources indeed, produces 13% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is a fairly large sector of emissions. And it turns out that right now, the population of the world is about 7.5 billion, projected to increase to somewhere between 9 and 10 billion by the year 2050. And the WHO estimates that we're going to need to have 60 to 70% increase in food production. Relying solely on increased production to close the gap is not going to produce enough food. So to increase our food production by 60 to 70%, we're going to have to have so much technological progress to increase the yield of crops. We're going to have to be far more efficient with land use. The level of this increase far exceeds that what happened in the time of the Green Revolution. And our research as far as agricultural productivity has stagnated. So the chances of that happening are really unlikely to close the gap. But the other question is, if our population is increasing by about 30% between now and 2050, why is it that we need to increase our food production by 60 to 70%? How does that compute? And it turns out that we are undergoing a transition that we refer to as the nutrition transition, or you might have heard of it as the dietary transition. As the standard of living increases globally, large shifts occur in our diet and physical activity patterns. Increase in urbanization, technological advances, physical activity patterns tend to lead us towards diets that are high in sugar, in fat, processed foods, but also a more sedentary lifestyle. And that's also a result of some of the technological advances that we see. This change in diet is referred to as the Western diet or the Westernization of our diets. And these lead to nutritional outcomes. As you can see, we see an increase in obesity and bone density problems. This is a multi-stage process. It's a 5-stage process. What you see on the slide over here are the last 3 stages. In stage 3, famine starts to decrease. And again, remember, I'm talking about an increase in the standard of living. You see a decrease in famine. People have longer life expectancies. Their health indicators improve. But as we continue along these lines, that leads to stage 4, where the diet changes in a negative way. And we start to see emergence of diseases that are referred to as diet-related non-communicable diseases. So these are where we see less infectious diseases, but more diseases related to diabetes and cardiovascular diseases, cancers, and so on. High-income countries have already seen this shift. Where we are is in stage 4. Some countries are already making the transition to stage 5, where we recognize these changes and we realize the value of eating better. And it actually starts to involve behavioral changes at the population level. And you start to see, again, improvements in health outcomes, improvements in behaviors. Very few countries are starting to see those changes. In the US, we see certain population groups moving towards stage 5. In some other countries, such as Japan and Singapore, the larger population shift is already occurring. But these patterns don't occur at the same time. As countries in Asia and in Africa move on from stage 3 to stage 4, we are starting to see some major dietary transitions, major nutrition transitions. And let's see what the impact of those transitions are. So here's an example of a dietary transition, and it shows up as meat consumption. On the bottom horizontal axis, you have the income levels, and on the vertical axis, you see the increase in meat consumption. And this is a fairly linear relationship. As income increases, our meat production increases significantly. And these transitions you can see with other types of products as well. In a wonderful article that was published by Tillman and Clark in the journal Nature, they looked at the changes in our diets from a global perspective. And they projected, if we continue with our diets as they are now, what would our diets look like in the year 2050? And they see that on average, we'd be consuming more calories, more protein, a lot more empty calories. Empty calories are ones that just provide us with energy, but no other nutrients. Far fewer fruits and vegetables. So essentially less plant-based foods, a lot more animal products. So while many countries, as I mentioned, some countries are on the cusp of that last stage of the dietary transition, moving to stage 5, there's a lot more countries and a much greater population that will be now moving from stage 3 to stage 4. And this is how their diet is going to be changing. So Tillman and Clark went further and looked at what would be the impact of this dietary change on health outcomes. And they also created, in addition to the projected 2050 diet, if we did not change, they compared that diet to what if people adopted a Mediterranean diet, which is rich in plant-based products, fish, nuts, seeds, olive oil, to a pescatarian diet, which is essentially a vegetarian diet plus fish, and then a vegetarian diet, which is rich in produce, beans, and grains. And they measured the reduction in relative risk. And what you can see that for the most part, all of these plant-based diets reduce our relative risk. So the higher the bar, the greater the reduction in risk of these diseases. And you can see particularly with type 2 diabetes, but also with coronary mortality, so people dying of heart disease. And so this kind of illustrates the magnitude of health benefits if we adopt an alternate diet. The link between diet, human health, environment is known as a trilemma, the diet, health, environment trilemma. And it comprises a series of interconnected problems that are confronting every society globally. And these problems are predicted to get progressively worse, to get even more severe during the coming decades, given the dietary transition that's taking place, which is going to affect the majority of our global population. And also because diets are socially, culturally, economically important, solutions to this trilemma really need to be focused on each set of populations. So we can't prescribe a diet. So every group of people needs to see what's going to work for them, given their economic state and given, of course, their cultural aspects when it comes to their diets. So what could these solutions look like? I'm going to kind of look at it in two ways. One is increase in food production, and secondly, a decrease in consumption. How will the world adequately feed close to 10 billion people by 2050 in a manner that benefits everyone? So this requires balancing the needs, right? We have to increase food production substantially, as I mentioned, 60 to 70%. But we also need to do it in a way that protects the environment. So the menu of solution includes increased food production. So to increase the yield of our crops, we can increase the productivity of livestock and aquaculture and utilize low environmental cost land. Those technological advances that would increase our productivity are not projected to grow at the rate at which we need them. The focus really needs to be on how we change our consumption. We can change our consumption by decreasing biofuel competition. So for example, when we grow corn to produce ethanol for fuel versus growing corn to feed people and animals, we can continue to decrease the rate of population increase. And then what we can do from a food and diet perspective is reduce food loss and food waste. You might have heard a lot of this in the news lately. We waste close to 40% of the food that we produce, sometimes because we lack the infrastructure to store food, but very often because we just don't use it. What I'd like to focus on, though, for the rest of the talk is how can we shift our diet to actually make an impact? So a nutritionally sound and sustainable diet would focus on reducing overconsumption of food. So reducing our consumption of calories, and particularly when we're looking at reducing animal-based products, looking at reducing the consumption of beef. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail here. Eating more plants and plant-based foods because they're better in terms of health. Choosing seafood from non-threatened stocks, allowing our fish resources to be repleted, and of course, reducing waste. So let me focus a little bit more on why we need to reduce our consumption of animal-based protein, and particularly beef. This is a busy slide, but please bear with me. As a scientist, I have to include a couple of graphs in any presentation. So this graph over here shows the difference in environmental pressures on 5 environmental domains. And the difference in environmental pressures between 2010 and the year 2050. So if you look at the top left, we are looking at greenhouse gas emissions. What is going to be the change in greenhouse gas emissions between the year 2010 and 2050? And what kind of food category is contributing to these environmental pressures? And if you look at just the greenhouse gas emissions, the red portion of the bar is the largest, the most significant, and that's related to animal products. Cattle, ruminant animals, so beef producing animals generate methane and carbon dioxide. They contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. But you can see, as far as the other indicators are concerned as well, cropland use, blue water use or freshwater use, nitrogen application and phosphorus applications. Those last two are the key ingredients in fertilizers. You can see the yellow portion of those bars are pretty large, and that's from staple crops. We're talking about corn, soy, wheat. And these crops are used not just to feed people, but they're used to feed animals, which will then feed people. So you can see that the pressures between 2020 and 2050 are going to increase tremendously. And you see the yellow and red bars are contributing significantly to these environmental pressures. And that's probably where we need to exercise most of our focus. Many people these days are interested in high protein diets. You might have heard of keto diets, right? And keto diets are effective in reducing weight loss, affecting weight loss. And that's kind of the reason for the interest in these keto diets. And a way to increase protein is to increase consumption of animal proteins. Fat is part of the keto diet, and to decrease grain-based foods such as bread or rice or corn. As the standard of living increases in countries, we tend to eat more animal protein as it is. The black line right in the middle shows you the amount of protein that we need to get. This is what nutritionists think is a good level of protein on average. And you can see how much more protein we consume, almost twice that amount in the US and in Canada. And most of that protein comes from animal products. On the left side, you can see a country like India, which most of their protein comes from plant foods. A small amount is coming from animal products. But remember, those countries on the left side of the scale, countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, have large population groups. Their incomes still are going to continue to increase for several more decades. And as their incomes increase, they will go through the demographic transition. They'll be consuming a lot more animal protein as well. So why is beef such a challenge? And this is a very quick graph, a schematic to show you in general, ruminant animals are not very efficient in processing food. It takes a lot more feed to produce 1 kilogram of meat. It takes a lot more water as compared to other animal products. It takes a lot more land to produce the same amount of beef. So beef in particular is very expensive to the environment. And so this leads us to um, what kind of diet would work well for us in terms of our health and for the environment. You might be familiar with the food pyramid from a few years ago. And this one on the left is a slight modified version of that pyramid. Right at the bottom, the base of the pyramid, instead of the starchy foods, which the earlier pyramid had, has essentially fresh produce, fruits and vegetables. Above that, you see the grain-based products, and then you get into protein sources, which could come from dairy or eggs or animals, but you see beef is right on top. So what we should be eating is the food at the bottom, lots of fresh produce. What we should be eating the least of are the animal products, particularly beef. On the right side is an inverted pyramid that shows you what we should be doing for our environment. And it turns out at the bottom of that pyramid, kind of at the inverted pyramid, you see fruits and vegetables are the least expensive for environment, whereas what's most expensive are the animal products. And again, particularly red meat is right on top. And you can see the connection between the two. What is good for our health is also good for our planet. So much of the action on how to sustainably feed the world has focused on boosting food production so far, agricultural production, which is not going to be easy. What's really going to make this work is a shift in our diet, a shift in our food consumption. So I'd like to talk a little bit into something that's an emerging area, and that is, what are the alternatives to meat consumption? You must have seen these products. You must have tried them out already. For decades now, we've had vegetable-based meat substitutes. These are made of soy or wheat or fungi. I've put an image of the corn product. Some people might have tried it. So using food processing technologies, these plant-based ingredients are formulated in such a way that they mimic the texture of meat, and there's flavors added to them so that they come close to mimicking the flavor of meat as well. You might have seen jackfruit-based products. If you douse jackfruit in enough barbecue sauce, then you can pretend that it's pulled pork. Insects, mealworms, and crickets are becoming somewhat popular, and that's for their high protein content. They also have a high bioconversion rate. You can grow these insects very quickly, and the adoption of insect-based ingredients, though, is limited. More recently, and this is just in this past 5 years, you've just seen an explosion of novel vegan meat replacements. So these are products such as Impossible Foods and Beyond Burger products. Now they use novel technologies. They're still using plant-based ingredients, but they're using novel technologies, including fermentation methods to produce meat-like products that come very close to mimicking the sensory aspects of meat products, including giving a sense of blood or hemoglobin that is present in real meat. What we're starting to see is a lot of interest, particularly for investors, in a category called cultured meat. This is meat that's made using, I'll explain the process to you in just a second, but this would be a product that's a meat product that is made without animal tissue. It goes by various names: clean meat, cell-based meat, cellular meat. It's in its infancy. We don't see a product yet on the market, but we should very soon. In fact, the projection is, and I'm sorry, the type is a little bit small on this. So here on the left side of the graph is where we are, where we will be in 2025, where the largest category is still conventional meat. And above that are the meat alternatives such as Impossible or Beyond Meat. And cultured meat is, will still be just starting off. But you can see by 2050, those proportions are predicted to change quite a bit. So how are these products made? It starts off with starter cells that are taken from an animal via a biopsy. And it's essentially stem cell technology. These cells are then given nutrients that they need: sugar, salt, amino acids, to allow them to proliferate. This is done in a bio reactor. They're fed a growth medium that contains these necessary nutrients. And then as the cells proliferate, they are placed on a scaffold that will, give the developing meat tension. As we know, we need to work our muscles in order for our muscles to grow. And this is essentially what we are doing, is we are growing muscle tissue. And so these scaffolds would exert push and pull. It'll exercise this meat, so it will multiply, and then that meat will be harvested. And then formulated, possibly using other ingredients to provide additional sensory characteristics. There's a lot of companies, a lot of players. Just within the last few years, this area has exploded. There are over about 24 companies, and I've just shown you some names on the slide over here that are working on different types of meat products, ranging from beef to seafood, shrimp. Modern Meadow is focusing on leather. There's companies that are focusing on silk. So animal products in general. And there's a huge amount of venture capital that has been invested. From what I'm hearing, it's $50 billion that is being invested. And the investments are, being made by not only by companies such as Google, but also traditional meat companies such as Cargill, because they see that this is the future of meat. As you can imagine, there's a lot of benefits that one can expect from cultured meat. Meat composition and quality can be controlled. You can control the levels of lean muscle versus fat. The risk of pathogens such as E. coli or Salmonella are greatly reduced. They take up less land, less water, and the suggestion is less energy. Less concerns about animal welfare or animal ethics, or pretty much none. We reduce the risks of epidemics. pandemics, if we allow that word to come into this presentation. Nutrients can be enhanced, the types of fatty acids, more omega-3s, which we don't get enough of, or other components can be reduced, cholesterol, for example. We can harvest cells from endangered animals or exotic animals to produce exotic meats. It will take less time. We can, NASA can use this on the International Space Station, for example. So lots of benefits there, but there are also a lot of challenges to consider. Number one right now is the technical challenge. So far, interestingly, the technology has produced muscle tissue. It has not produced meat. And there is a difference between muscle and meat that we eat. We don't eat pure muscle. We eat muscle that's interlaced with fat. We eat meat that's aged over time, and the biochemical processes that take place during that aging is what contributes to the flavor, to the tenderness of meat. So how do we grow the cells to produce, not just replicate and keep producing the same muscle tissue, but also to produce fat that contributes to the marbling of meat? Can we grow enough meat in bioreactors to feed the world? Will we get the right sensory qualities? Will we get all those biochemical processes? So lots of challenges to overcome, but a lot of progress is being made on all of these fronts. And of course, there are the costs. I mentioned to you the nutrient media, the growth media that's needed to feed these cells. That is probably the most expensive component right now. But then there's also energy consumption that can be expensive. And then we have all the other issues of consumer acceptance, regulations, right? Who's going to oversee regulations? Who's going to approve it? Who's going to manage safety aspects? So there's a lot of things to consider, but these are not insurmountable. This will happen in the next few years. The costs right now, the estimated costs are astronomical for producing 1 pound of cultured meat, but the prices will come down very quickly once the process is scaled up. So the consumption shift has already begun. I like to call it, that transition from stage 4 to stage 5 of our dietary transition. I like to call that a conscious diet, right? It starts off with having a product that is available to people. Then we need education, we need an increase in awareness. We need a culture shift that, where we start to see these products become culturally more acceptable. And then then we need to minimize the disruption to our food supply systems as well. But these are all the aspects that are involved in a shift in consumption. And if we can effect this shift, if we can effect a change in our dietary behavior, where we can be mindful of our health, and we can be mindful of the health of our planet, not only our children, but our children's children will be better off, and we will see the effects in our lives. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity, and I will open it up to your questions.
Thank you, Anu. What a most informative, interesting program today. We're so pleased to have you with us and enjoyed that thoroughly. Before we go to the first question, I would like to tell you, however, that Town and Gown is pleased to be making a $300 gift to the Chapman Fund in your honor to provide scholarship support to students of Schmid College of Science and Technology.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And now for our first question. For decades, scientists have said that our growing population is unsustainable, and yet because of technology, aren't we producing more food and with less water, less land mass, and less waste?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We are producing more food than we have ever produced before. Not only has our food yield become more efficient, we probably have more food we have enough food to feed every person on this earth. We have more calories being produced than everyone needs. The problem is that this food is not equitably distributed. So we have, let's say an average diet needs, average person needs 2,000 calories per day. In the US, we have more like 3,300 calories available to each of us every day. But that might not be true of countries in Asia or in sub-Saharan Africa, where they might have a deficit of calories available to them. So yes, we will continue to see an increase in food production, but as our diets change, the food production capacities are not going to keep up with our needs.
Okay, our next question. What are some solutions for low-income communities who need to rely on cheap, fast food, but want to decrease environmental impacts of this diet?
Yeah, it's a very good question. When you see the shift in our diets, that stage 4 to stage 5, you're seeing it among people who have the means to afford a higher quality diet. And that's the sad part, a higher quality diet shouldn't be available to people with high incomes. But I think we can have a very high quality diet even if we did not have a high income. Uh, if you're looking at the availability of food in our markets, we need to make fresh fruits and vegetables far more available. We need to make sure that these products are priced in such a way that everyone can afford them. Uh, it's taking a shift in the products that we choose. So making that choice between an apple versus a bag of chips is challenging one, but we need to do it ourselves. We need to model these behaviors for our children. We need to make sure that that we don't have food deserts where the supermarkets carry plenty of these fresh foods that we are shopping on the periphery of our supermarkets, and that we're changing how our supermarkets work, where fresh fruits and vegetables are in the center of the store, easily available in a way that people can access them and afford them.
Thank you. Next question. As we are able to have people survive diabetes, cancer, and heart disease, and then reproduce offspring with these genetic tendencies, how will this affect the food supply?
Well, yes. The impact of our diet on disease outcomes is very clear. So we see a high prevalence of type 2 diabetes in our populations. And we see high rates of cardiovascular disease as well. A lot of these chronic diseases can be managed very well with managing our diets. And so even if our children have the tendency to develop type 2 diabetes because it's part of our genetic makeup, they can change it. They can actually change the outcomes in such a way. And research suggests that when they have their children, if they are eating a diet that's helpful to their health, then they can change the genetic outcomes in their kids. This whole area of nutrigenomics suggests that we can change our the expression of our genes based on what we eat. So something that very interesting area, but yes, diet can impact those outcomes as well.
Okay, can you talk more about the benefits of soy or the negatives, and why is it needed or used in meat replacement products? And then is soy an important dietary need? And then how kind of combining some here, how healthy are the chemicals used to create laboratory grown imitation meat products?
Okay, so it's a multiple part question. Let me start with soy-based products. If you can think of the population of Asia, and I'm talking about East Asia, where soy is a staple in their diets, the negative health impacts of soy are unproven. Soy is rich in proteins. It's one of the few plant-based proteins that has all the amino acids that we need. I eat soy. I enjoy soy-based products. I eat plenty of tofu and other soy-based products. So far, no negative health impacts. Because soy is a very nutritious product, it was, and also it has the protein structure that lends itself very well to processing manipulations, and it can mimic the texture of meat. So the early meat alternatives were formulated using soy. The newer products that we are seeing, some of them use soy, they also use wheat gluten, they use other lentil and pea-based proteins as well. So they use different types of proteins in addition to soy. I hope that satisfies the first part of the question. The second part of the question was related to the ingredients that are used in alternative meat products. For the most part, the ingredients that are being used are things like binders, texturizers. These are ingredients that are used in our everyday products naturally. We're talking about gums and stabilizers. These are not preservative type products, and they are approved by the FDA already. In fact, when they say clean meat as a euphemism for cultured meat, it really should be free of these kinds of preservative products. So that's going to be interesting to see is what kind of shelf life can they achieve with cultured meat products. It's still muscle meat, it's still protein, it's still food that bacteria would like to feast on. So it would need to be refrigerated, and it probably will have a limited shelf life along those lines. But when you first produce it, if it's done right in a bioreactor, it should be maintained under sterile conditions. So safety-wise, they might not need to use any chemical preservatives to get the shelf life that they need.
Okay. Can you tell us what studies are available to Chapman students that lead to careers?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So food science, as Paula mentioned to you when she introduced me, was an area that I discovered by accident. And the way I see it is food science is a portal into a plethora of careers. There's obviously the technical side. So any product that you see in the supermarket, any food product that you see has gone through the hands of a food scientist that's been involved in formulating the product, in making sure that it's safe, that it has a consistent, high quality. They've put attention on adhering to any kinds of regulations. food scientists are also involved in sales, in marketing, regulations. So many different aspects. You could go more towards the nutrition side, developing healthier products. You could go into the nonprofit sector, helping, agencies such as the WHO or the Peace Corps or the World Food Program develop products for emergencies. There's just a tremendous number of options. In our program, we offer a master's degree in food science. We offer also a dual degree program where our students pursue the MS in food science and an MBA simultaneously. And that leads them to a slightly different career option. We've had alumni who've gone on to get law degrees, and that area of food law, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, is needing a lot of people that are trained in both areas.
Okay, with alternative imitation meat products, I worry about the chemicals and other additives to trick my taste buds into thinking it's meat. Is this an issue? And then can this even be called meat?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, I ask people a lot about if they've tried, the Impossible Burger or any of the Beyond Meat products. And you get a range of answers from, oh, I tried it, I didn't like it, to I couldn't tell the difference. So it's the response to these kinds of products is personal. These are the novel meat alternatives, right? Where you can kind of tell the difference. Many people can tell the difference, but they think it's fine. It tastes okay. But with the meat, with the cultured meat products, it is going to be meat. So you're really not tricking your body in any way, because it started off as a cell from an animal that was multiplied, except that you didn't multiply it in an animal as it was growing, you multiplied it in a bioreactor. So you're not really tricking your sensory perception in any way using ingredients or chemicals. It is meat. So I think the second question of that, Paula, if you don't mind repeating that.
That was, can it even be called meat?
Yeah, and that is controversial. As you can imagine, the meat lobby is not very happy about it being called meat. And we've seen this with milk products. When you say soy milk or almond milk, can you call it milk? Because milk is defined by our regulations as a product of bovine animals. And we don't want consumers to be, to be, to have a misconception that this is really real milk or meat. But in the case of meat, the nomenclature of it has not been finalized. The major food agencies, the FDA and the USDA, are working together to come up, are going to have to arbitrate this decision. What is it going to be called? How is it going to be regulated? What kind of oversight? So if this is a meat product that is grown outside of an animal, are some of the same safeguards that we have in place for meat grown on a ranch going to apply, or processed in a slaughterhouse? Do we need the same kind of safeguards for meat that's grown in a bioreactor? So it's going to be a very interesting area to watch even over the next 5 years.
Okay, well, I want to thank the audience for such wonderful questions, and I'm sorry we can't get to all of them. This one will be our last question. It's actually from a friend, Charlene Baldwin. She is thanking you for a beautiful presentation. And she wonders if you could tell the story of the development of the pizza crackers for astronauts that won an award for your students some years ago. And she asks, are students still working on food science development? And did that student stay in food science?
Thank you. Yeah, Charlene, it's great to hear from you, and thank you for asking about that. Each fall, I teach a class called Food Product Development. In this class, we solicit a project from a company so that our students get real world experience in how products are developed in the market. So in the process of 4 months, we go through the process of concept testing to developing prototypes, doing the sensory testing, looking at the regulations, looking at the technological aspects, scaling up, costing, marketing. Um, and this is a long time ago in 2002. This particular class was asked to develop a product, snack products, healthy snack products for kids. And one group in particular decided to incorporate, they did their concept testing with young kids, school children, and pizza was the number one food of school children. And so they looked into how can we make pizza healthier. They decided to infuse pizza dough with enough vegetables that it would have at least one serving of vegetables in each serving of pizza. And it actually turned out to be a fantastic project. That year or the year later, NASA at that time, and this was through the Iowa State University, had a competition on food that could be adopted at or produced on the International Space Station. So this would have to be a product that's produced given the resources that were easily available, that would meet the nutritional needs of an adult astronaut, produce the least amount of waste, and be the most efficient. And that was, at that time, it seemed like soy was a really good candidate for incorporating it into different types of foods. And so what this particular group of students did, they used a byproduct of soybean processing. When you remove the milk, the residue that's left, it's rich in fiber. It's actually very rich in taste as well. It's called okara. And they added it into the dough, and they ended up making a pizza chip product. So it was shelf stable, it was nutritionally enhanced, and it tasted very good. And they won the NASA challenge. And that was a very exciting year because the student team, including me, got to visit the Johnson Space Center. And we had a lot of media that year, including we were featured in the New York Times Sunday magazine. So very, very exciting for us.
Well, thank you, Anu. I think that was a wonderful way to end this presentation. So we just thank you again for a most noteworthy and interesting program. We really enjoyed it. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. If you would like to watch this presentation again or share it with your friends, the recorded YouTube version will be posted on the Town and Gown webpage, chapman.edu/TG. Our next lunch at the forum will be on Thursday, February 4th. Our program is entitled Breaking Barriers, Empowering Women Through Sports. Our speaker will be Carol Jew, Chapman University women's basketball coach. So we hope you will join us again then, and have a wonderful rest of your day.